Welcome back to the channel. Vandell here, co-founder of Black Swan Capitalists. This is a video about XRP and Ripple for traditional finance people. So, in the financial system, there's this paradox. We can send information around the world in milliseconds from one country to another, like pictures, text messages, email, yet cross-border payments, moving money from one country to another, especially between banks, can still take days to settle. It's slow and outdated. So, in a world where data moves instantly, value still moves through a very fragmented, outdated network. And the reason is because they are tied to legacy rails that really haven't been updated in the last 50 years. So the financial system needs to be updated, and financial institutions and central banks are trying to make that shift. Now, we know the system is slow, opaque, and expensive, so it's clear that at this point, governments, central banks are trying to get on board with the disruption taking place. Now, to keep the system functional currently, to compensate for these inefficiencies in the financial system, financial institutions are forced to park over $27 trillion approximately in Nostro and Vostro accounts sitting around the world. Dormant capital that earns no yield. It's not doing anything. It's just sitting there, and it exists solely to support outdated settlement infrastructure because the financial system has not been updated. Now, this capital that could otherwise be used for credit creation, investment, maybe balance sheet optimization, and basically flow back into the economy. But instead, it's just sitting in pre-funded accounts around the world, doing nothing. And it doesn't need to be that way. So this isn't a minor issue. It's a structural inefficiency at the heart of the global financial system. And that's specifically where Ripple, the company, and XRP, their native token, come into the equation. And I'm going to explain in simple terms so that you could fully grasp what Ripple is, what they're doing, what XRP is, and what its purpose was designed for. So what is Ripple? In simple terms, Ripple is a private fintech technology company, a payment company as well, and they're based in San Francisco. And what they do is they build global payment solutions for financial institutions. And that's why I always say Ripple was designed to serve financial institutions, not retail. And their goal is to improve how money moves around the world, how value moves from A to B to Z. And ultimately, their goal is to be a bank, especially for cross-border payments, which is why they recently applied for the banking license in the US, which we said was going to happen for years. And today, the system is expensive, slow, and efficient, so they are trying to solidify their place in the financial system. Now, Ripple, the company, created a suite of software solutions, different things that people have talked about for a while. Originally, it was called RippleNet. That's one of them. Now evolving into its liquidity hub and Ripple payments platforms. And that helps banks and payment providers and even central banks send and settle payments in not days, but seconds. So it's instantly, something we've never seen before within the financial system. And that's why it's a disruptive technology on the blockchain technology. So think of Ripple as a software company, basically focused and working to modernize, you could say, the plumbing of the global financial system. And that's why they're working with central banks and financial institutions. So much like how, for example, Cisco built the infrastructure that allowed the internet to scale and become what it is today. So a similar concept, but Ripple is focused on the money, the value. And what is XRP? XRP is a digital asset, also known as a cryptocurrency, and it's Ripple's native token of the XRP ledger. And the XRP ledger is basically a public, decentralized blockchain that was launched, to our knowledge, in 2012. And the XRP ledger is basically the network, and XRP runs on that network. So the XRP ledger was designed specifically to facilitate fast, secure, and low cost cross-border payments and transactions. So unlike Bitcoin, for example, which takes 10 minutes and sometimes even more in order to confirm a transaction, XRP actually settles within a few seconds. So 3 to 5 seconds with minimal energy use, which is a big deal for the global elites, and very cheap, zero transaction fees, almost zero, fractions of a penny. Now, XRP serves multiple purposes. It acts as a bridge currency, but between fiat currencies. Okay, so for example, US dollars, it moves in XRP to pesos, eliminating the need for pre-funded accounts, the nostro vostro accounts we talked about earlier, which is capital just sitting dormant, doing nothing. And this eliminates the middlemen. So it's a problem there for the middle guys, because that's how they make their money. But it provides instant liquidity and payment solutions for banks and financial institutions, which is key here. And most importantly, XRP is an open source and not owned or controlled by a central company, not the network, to our knowledge. And anyone can basically use XRP or use the XRP ledger and XRP itself. So with or without Ripple's involvement. And that's always been the case since the technology emerged. Now, here's a better analogy to better understand and grasp where Ripple, or what Ripple is, and XRP. So think of Ripple like Apple, building software such as iOS, iMessage, Safari, and hardware like iPhones. And think of XRP like the internet protocol that Apple apps run on. So you don't necessarily need Apple to use the internet, but Apple builds and provides tools to make the internet easier and faster to use. And likewise, you could think of it in that sense, Ripple builds enterprise tools and solutions using XRP and the XRP ledger, which is their network. And XRP and the XRP ledger can exist and function basically independently of Ripple. So they don't need Ripple, the company. It's completely separate. So that's one way to look at it, just so you have a better visual. But just like Apple's core is basically the iPhone, Ripple's core is the XRP ledger. And Ripple without XRP is kind of like, you could say, Apple without the iPhone. So that's the connection there, and that's one way to look at it. So they're both important and they complement each other. But the value, I believe, is in the protocol, which is the network, XRP. Now, Ripple has already formed over 300 partnerships with various financial institutions, some we know of, some we don't. There's NDAs involved, of course. And they're now applying for a US banking license just recently. And that just shows us it's a major move, and that basically signals where this is all heading. And we talked about this for a very long time, and here they are today trying to get the license. So the result is a huge advantage over competition in the market. We call that an economic moat. So most digital assets are very speculative. We all know this. It's like a whole casino. And a lot of the tokens have no real world use case, no utility, and most importantly, no strong collaborations or partnerships. But XRP is unique in that sense. The reason is because they're serving a very defined market need, and they're tackling a very real multi-trillion-dollar issue that isn't coming in the future, but it's already here and it already exists in the current financial system for the last 50 years. And their solution isn't just good for tackling these issues. It's superior compared to many other ones in the space trying to copycat and do the same thing. And they already have adoption underway. It's a gradual process and it takes time, just like any industrial revolution throughout history. So as capital markets increasingly digitize and basically tokenization becomes more mainstream and adopted from retail institutions, the question is no longer if this transformation will happen, because we know it's happening and it's coming, and innovation innovates and it gets adopted. The question is who will provide the rails and the infrastructure and solutions for that transition. And that's what I like about XRP. Now, unlike many other speculative crypto projects, XRP is actually backed by real world utility, real use case, enterprise demand from institutions, and clearly a defined role in the emerging financial system and the architecture here. So that's clear as day when you read between the lines and look at what they're doing, not what they're saying. And financial institutions will integrate Ripple's solution, in my opinion, and that will continue over time. And the more XRP is used as a liquidity and settlement tool, I think the more valuable it's going to become. And I'll explain my thesis behind that very shortly. So, in my opinion, this is an opportunity to invest not just in speculation, but in the protocols and the infrastructure. Now, XRP represents exposure to real solutions, okay? One that solves multi-trillion-dollar problems that already exist, as I said, backed by enterprise financial institutions and working with regulators on top of that, central banks as well, for a long time now, and institutional players that really control the world and the monetary system. Okay, so if they're sitting at the same table with these people, that says a lot. In my opinion, that holds weight. Now, my investment thesis on XRP is very simple, and I'll compress it even more. I believe XRP is really positioned and has been for a long time to rise significantly in value over the years and decades ahead of us. And I know you could think this is just speculation. There is some speculation involved, but it's more than that. It's grounded, very much grounded in two major forces that I believe will shape the future of global markets and push the XRP price much higher. So to keep it simple, we'll talk about two. Fiat currency debasement. This is number one. XRP, like every other asset out there, is priced in fiat currency, okay? US dollars, euro, and these fiat currencies are in constant decline because you know what central banks love to do? Credit creation, debase the currency. Central banks around the world are forced to print money just to keep the debt-based system functioning, and they basically create more money out of thin air. It's like keeping the system on artificial life support. And as the currency supply continues to expand, we know what happens. The value of each individual unit drops, okay? But here's the thing. When you have more dollars, more money printing, more currency units chasing the same number of asset prices or assets, prices rise, okay? Scarce assets, limited assets, it pushes asset prices up. And that's simple monetary math. And in a system that's built on ever-growing debt. I don't see the trend ever slowing down anytime soon. As a matter of fact, it's accelerating. So, as long as XRP continues to hold basically long-term relevance and long-term growth potential and still be around, its price, when measured in fiat currency, will climb naturally. The more money they print, the more currency units in supply circulating, the more asset prices measured in fiat are going to go up. The second thing is real demand from fixed supply, demand and supply. The second force is the demand that's going to come from institutions and retail. So it doesn't matter how things go. Interestingly, supply and demand dictate price. And over time, demand will push XRP to higher levels, in my opinion. And whether it's from institutional players, looking to move value across borders, use their instant liquidity, or whether it's from retail investing speculation, like us, retail investors, what's coming is inevitable. That demand will push up the price. And every time XRP is acquired and held, that supply is being removed from circulation as the demand increases. So, unlike fiat, XRP has a fixed supply, and it's capped. It's 100 billion total, and even less, half of that circulating. And that's the setup. Fixed supply, growing demand, and long-term utility. So demand will push prices even higher, and that's the second force. So asset prices are ultimately, we all know this, governed by supply and demand. And with that dynamic in place, as long as that exists, it's only a matter of time before price starts to reflect that demand. And that demand will continue to increase, I believe, over time. And not overnight, but over time, I believe XRP will start hitting new levels, and this will eventually price most people out. So, put simply, more currency units circulating, plus growing demand, plus a fixed supply, in my opinion, that translates to long-term price appreciation. I don't see it going any other direction. Sure, we'll have volatility, price action in between, but the long-term growth trend is an upwards trajectory. And this is why I continue to accumulate and hold XRP, not for a quick trade, although I do have a short-term trade position within my portfolio. I primarily buy XRP and other digital assets, but XRP specifically for long-term growth potential, because I believe the price is going to continue to rise and utility will bring more opportunities to the market, like staking, yield, and I believe we'll see that once regulatory frameworks become more solidified and adoption takes place. But the legacy system is breaking down in slow motion and new infrastructure is being built. And as global adoption continues, and we're clearly going in that direction, I expect XRP to be one of the few assets that actually survives when we get on the other side. And what I'm referring to is once the dust settles and a lot of these cryptos and companies go bust, there will be a few that emerge from the ashes, just like during the dot-com era. And I believe XRP and Ripple will be one of them. So don't be fooled by noise, influencers, mainstream headlines, and don't chase bubbles, okay? The key is to get in early, because when the financial system fully upgrades, and we know that's coming, we're already on that path, and it's in the process, and when it does upgrade, you'll want to be holding protocols and digital assets that power the new system, not the ones that are going to collapse under it just so you can make a quick buck. You need to think long term, because most of these cryptocurrencies and the companies behind them will vanish. This is inevitable. We saw this during the dot-com bubble. We've seen this actually throughout every technological disruptive revolution in the past. I'll see you guys next time.